Rebecca Wirfs-Brock. Hi, Rebecca. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you virtually, Alex.
So we met first time in Porto, where we were speakers at the same conference at Agile Porto. But what I didn't know back then is that Porto was also kind of a part of the PLOP communities, pattern language of programming. There seems to be a strong center there. And I also attended one of your courses on design, which was very interesting. And I didn't know back then a lot about you, actually, which is a shame, because I like to know more about the history of programming, and I believe you are a big part of this history, actually. So can you tell us a bit, we discussed with Ellen Wirfs-Brock about Tektronix, and I know you are also involved there.
Yes. Well, so Alex, you should realize that, yeah, we were a Tektronix family. So Alan was working at Tektronix Laboratories, bringing out the first Smalltalk, and at that time I was a principal engineer working in graphics workstation, and at that time my manager's manager decided to take over leading the Smalltalk at the AI machines group, and I was coming back from maternity leave, and he basically said, you want to join as a principal engineer working on productizing the Smalltalk. And I said, great, Alan's been doing very interesting stuff here. I don't know anything about this Smalltalk, but it's much more interesting and interactive than the graphics terminals that I'd been working on. Anyway, so I joined, and 2 weeks later, the manager of the group left to go work elsewhere at Xerox PARC. And I started, my manager said to me, well, would you like to manage the group? And I go, well, okay. So I was the manager of the first Smalltalk AI machines software effort. And after that, since I'm really an engineer, I went back and worked on color Smalltalk and trying to figure out things. And I got involved because Smalltalk was, at that time, we may not think so today, but at the time, its graphics were cool. It was doing things that were, you could programmatically do stuff that was just very interesting. So I got in there from the graphics angle of Smalltalk, with these windows, could overlap, and we could do all these interesting visual effects. And it just happened to be that there were objects as well.
Yeah, so I guess this brings us to object-oriented programming, because that was, from what I understand, Smalltalk was one important part of object-oriented programming back then. It was also inspired by Alan Kay's vision of OOP. So what was the initial vision?
Well, I think that the idea of a personal Dynabook is, even back then, what we had in a Smalltalk graphics workstation was pushing the edge of what you could do technically with a personal workstation, and potential of really doing things where programmatically I could do very playful kinds of things in this very nice environment that was very forgiving of you making programming mistakes, because you could stop and start and it was alive with objects, which is something that was we really don't have any other environment like that today. We should talk about living objects and what that really means, because Java certainly isn't that way. But anyway, it was an environment where I could write an application. I didn't have to think about all the things of connecting to the operating system or doing things, because the class libraries in there were very conducive to doing programming. I could do simulations, I could do graphics, I could do visualizations of things. So it was pretty neat. Now, is that Alan Kay's vision of children programming without, without thinking, by just gesturing and having very natural, organic kind of interactions with your computers? No, but it was a big step forward from what I was doing before. That was PL80, which is a one step up from an assembly language programming on 8086 machines. So it was a big step forward.
So how would you design a program back then? What were the things that you were thinking about?
Well, it was interesting that when I first started programming in Smalltalk, I had to translate the way I was thinking in the procedural programming and try to map those to these weird concepts like messages, objects, and in some sense, I needed that sort of bridge of, well, what's really different between a call to a method on an object and a function call, a procedural call? Well, because there's an object that has retained state, which is very, very different than when I'm just calling a function, plug in the parameters, call stack, return. There are these things that retain state over time that interact. So when you think about what does it mean to program in the Smalltalk environment, not only would I have to think about conceptualizing my program to do things, but there was this environment where all these other objects were alive and doing things too. So everything from my debugging environment to my browsing to find code to create classes was alive and part of this object-oriented infrastructure around me. So it was kind of weird, when you first started out, because you say, well, what is my application, right? I have to start something. I have to interact with what's already there, and I have to kind of carve out conceptually what my set of objects are doing. And yeah, we had lots of help there with the classes to do that. If I wanted to construct a view, there were different kinds of views that you could, create classes from. But the behavior of your objects that were going to retain the state over time and interact with each other was the real challenge. If you might say, in today's modern terms, your domain model, your set of objects. And so then figuring that out was kind of interesting too, because when you think about it, what behaviors and what data should be partitioned into these objects that interact over time to accomplish something was something that you hadn't really structured a program that way before. I mean, it was very different. I know how to do functional decomposition, but this was quite different. And so that's kind of what it was like. It was not just cut and dried how I make an application. We had to kind of figure it out. Yeah, there's this visual representation. There's this thing called model view controller, but the model part was like, whoa, a set of interacting objects that exist over time, working together to do something. And okay, so that was quite different. approach, yeah. So I did not figure this out on my own. I kind of did, I'm going to say, crappy programming. Observed people who really got how objects interacted and sort of seamlessly started building these very interesting applications, and observed what they were doing and said, okay, I can learn a lot from Brian Wilkerson, the co-author, one of my co-authors on my first book, or seeing how Ward Cunningham thinks about objects and their interactions. And actually Ward was quite a, he made all objects very lively, quite different designs than I might do, but it was just an inspiration. So it wasn't like we had a pattern, if you will, for programming when we first started.